Hi, I'm Leisa Peterson, and today we're diving deep into a critical issue that affects every American, our national debt. It's something that I've wanted to create a video on for a long time, and today just felt like the right day. My passion is helping people understand money, especially given how financial issues are shaping up in our political landscape. When I say we're facing a serious economic challenge, it's not speculation. It's based on the fact that I have an MBA. I've worked in financial services for nearly 30 years. I have deep industry knowledge. And what I wanted to do was explore why experts believe we have 20 years to address a looming debt crisis. Buckle up for an eye-opening ride that could change how you think about your economic future. I'm going to do my best to break things down into super simple terms. If you have any questions, please ask in the comments. I'm going to break this into 8 parts, so I'll go into greater depth and then probably create videos on particular topics that you ask me about in follow-up to this video. Part 1, the warning. Let's start with a bombshell. The Wharton Budget Model, one of America's top economic think tanks, made a startling prediction. They estimate that we have only about 20 years to take corrective action before our debt situation becomes unsustainable. This is a projection from some of the brightest economic minds in the country. Thomas Jefferson, going way back to the beginning, said that we should never spend, or you should never spend your money before you've earned it. Seems our government hasn't been heeding this advice for quite some time, nor have a lot of Americans, right? Debt is a serious issue that many of us confront. And this isn't to say that it's easy to live without debt. It isn't, especially if you're going to buy a home or buy cars. But the point is that we have to be very, very mindful of how we manage debt, both personally as well as collectively. Part 2, understanding the national debt. Before we dive deeper, let's clarify what we mean by national debt and how it affects our economy. The national debt is the total amount of money that the federal government owes its creditors. It's essentially the accumulation of annual budget deficits over time. This debt can be broken down into 2 main categories. Public debt, this is the money owed to individuals, corporations, and other governments who have purchased US Treasury securities. And then we have intragovernmental holdings, and this is the money that the government owes to itself, primarily in government trust funds like Social Security. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The government's primary source of income is taxes from our economic output or gross domestic product. These taxes are crucial for funding essential services and programs, including schools and education, infrastructure like roads and bridges, military and national defense, social services like Medicare, Medicaid, affordable care, healthcare, Social Security, and one of the biggest line items is interest on our existing debt, and it's rising each and every year. So ideally, the taxes collected every year should cover all of the expenses, right? That's called balancing the budget. And the House of Representatives is responsible for putting this together. The Senate must approve it, and then the president must sign it before it moves forward. But when you spend more than you earn, right, which has been happening for quite some time, especially since 2001, we have to borrow to make up the difference. The borrowing increases our debt, and right now our debt is skyrocketing. When we talk about the debt crisis, we're primarily concerned with public debt. This is the portion that must be financed through the financial markets, and it directly impacts our economy. As this debt grows, so does the amount we pay in interest, which means less money available for other important programs and services. Think of it like this. If you consistently spend more on your credit card than you earn and only make minimum payments, your debt will keep growing. Eventually, a significant portion of your income will go towards just paying the interest, leaving less for your actual needs and wants. That's the situation that's happening right now, but on a massive scale. This growing debt can lead to serious economic consequences, which we'll explore more in later detail. But for now, remember, our national debt is not just a number, it's a reflection of our nation's financial health, and it has real world impact on every American. Second, let's talk about something big that happened in 1971. A monumental shift was about to happen in the US economy. Imagine two items side by side, a shiny gold coin and a crisp dollar bill. Before 1971, these two were deeply connected. You could walk into any bank with a dollar bill and ask for its equivalent in gold. It was a promise, a guarantee. Every dollar in your pocket was backed by something real, something you could hold in your hand. But in 1971, everything changed. Picture that gold coin disappearing, leaving only the dollar bill behind. Suddenly, that piece of paper isn't tied to anything tangible anymore. Its value doesn't come from gold, it comes from something much less concrete: trust. So now, when you look at a dollar bill, you're not seeing a claim on gold, you're seeing a symbol of faith, faith in our government, faith in our economy. It's like we all collectively agreed that this piece of paper has value simply because we say it does. This is what is known as fiat money. It's money that has value because a government says it does, not because it represents a fixed amount of gold or any other commodity. It's a fundamental shift in how we think about money, and it's had a profound implication for our economy and national debt by going off the gold standard. Fiat in Latin is let it be done. And that's exactly how our money works now. So, why does it matter when we talk about the debt crisis? Well, the public debt, the portion of national debt owed to individuals, corporations, and other governments, is what we're really concerned about. Why? Because this debt has to be financed through financial markets. It's like a giant IOU that directly impacts our economy. And here's the kicker: without the gold standard acting like a natural limit, it's become easier for that debt to grow. It's like removing the emergency brake on a car parked on a hill. Suddenly, there's a lot less stopping that car from rolling downhill. That shift in 1971 set the stage for the debt situation we're grappling with today. I will say this: when I was getting my MBA between 1990 and 1992, I remember a teacher, a finance teacher, talking about going off the gold standard at that time. And I knew intuitively that that was a disaster. I knew enough about human beings and the way we operate when given an opportunity to overspend, take advantage of situations, we would do that. And I knew that someday, I was hoping not during my lifetime, we would see a serious problem in our economy as a result of this decision. So it may mean more when I say to you that the US abandoned the gold standard. At that time, our federal debt was $398 billion, or about 26% of GDP, gross domestic product. This means for every dollar our economy produced, we owed about 26 cents. Fast forward to 1992, when I got this teaching, by then our debt had ballooned to $4 trillion, or 63% of GDP. That's more than doubling our debt to GDP ratio in just 2 decades. Now, the real explosion happened in the early 21st century. In 2000, the debt stood at $5.6 trillion. Then came the dot-com bust, 9/11, two wars, the 2008 financial crisis, quantitative easing. And by 2015, just 15 years later, the debt had more than tripled to $18.5 trillion. It's crucial to note that much of this increase in the debt did not translate to improving the living standards for the average American. Instead, a significant portion of the wealth generated during this period went to the top 1% of earners. Now, brace yourself. Today, in 2024, we're facing a staggering $34 trillion debt, which means we now owe about $1.25 for every dollar our economy produces. In just over 50 years, we've gone from owing $386 billion to $33.2 trillion. But here's the thing, that number is actually misleading. The more relevant figure is what's called the debt held by the public, which is currently at 26.3 trillion, or about 100% of GDP. Why does this distinction matter? Because debt held by the public represents the amount of debt that must be financed through financial markets. It's the number that really impacts our economy and future financial stability. It's like we've been on a national shopping spree, putting everything on credit, and the bill is coming due, and it's a whopper. Part 3, breaking down the numbers. Let's break down some crucial facts about our current situation. Here's where it gets scary. The Wharton Budget Model estimates that US debt held by the public cannot exceed about 200% of GDP, even under today's favorable market conditions. So that's our absolute upper limit before things start to fall apart. Picture, if you will, a person walking a tightrope between two skyscrapers. So if you look at this tightrope walker, that's the US economy. And right now, we're about halfway across the rope. If we reach the other side, that's 200% debt to GDP, and there's no safety net. Under current policy, we have about 2 decades before no amount of tax increases or spending cuts could prevent a government default, a default where we're not able to pay the money that we are borrowing. We're not able to pay the interest on the money we're borrowing because of how big it has become. To put this in perspective, in 2023 alone, the US had a budget shortfall of 1.7 trillion. That was added to our debt in just 1 year. If we go back and look at the 90s, they were really focused on balancing the budget, and we had a debt of about 4 trillion, right, in 92, and by 2000, so 8 years later, we had only increased the debt by about 1.7, just under 1.7 trillion. That was in 8 years. But last year, we were in a situation where we added $1.7 trillion to the debt. So let's take a moment to understand the scale of the numbers that we're talking about. It can be really, really hard for us humans to understand when we go from a million to a billion to a trillion and what that means. So here's what I want you to think about. If you started counting dollars nonstop at $1 per second, counting to $1 million would take you about 11.5 days. Okay, manageable. Counting to $1 billion would take you almost 32 years. Counting to $1 trillion would take nearly 32,000 years. Counting to our current national debt of $34 trillion would take over 1 million years. That's the scale we're dealing with. When we talk about billions and trillions in our national debt, we're discussing amounts so large they're hard to fathom. Now, just imagine those dollars as miles on our economic journey, and we're not just crossing, we're crossing the country on a road trip. We're on an interstellar journey with debt that would take us beyond our solar system. Now, you might be thinking, these are big numbers, but what does it really mean for me? Great question. A debt to GDP ratio exceeding 100% poses significant risks that affect every American. And we're already actually feeling these effects, but people are blaming it on the politics, and that's not actually the case. This is a product of what's happening, and part of the reason why I wanted to create this video to explain to you what's really going on under the surface. So another way to think about this is imagine our economy is a car and every American is a passenger, and we're on a long road trip, but our car is overloaded and struggling. You could even imagine like a family is packed into a car and you're driving down the highway, clearly overloaded. The trunk is open, stuffed with luggage that's labeled national debt. Suitcases are piled on the roof, and even more are crammed inside, squishing the passengers. Someone at some point flags the car down, right? And says, folks, your car is dangerously overloaded, and starts to explain why this is going to make your journey so much more risky. So here's how it relates to you. Number one, increased interest burden. So when we're overloaded like this, it's like constantly buying expensive premium gas, leaving less money for food and hotels. Slowing economic growth. The overloaded car can't reach the highway speeds, and so it slows down the entire journey. Reduced fiscal flexibility. There's no room for an emergency spare tire or tools. If something goes wrong, you're in deep trouble. Weakened investor confidence. Other drivers are hesitant to share the road with you because they're worried that you are going to cause an accident. Intergenerational burden. The kids in the backseat will inherit this overloaded car when they're old enough to drive. Crowding out private investments. There's no space to pick up anything along the way. No souvenirs, no supplies, no opportunities. Inflation risks, right? And this is where I think we're all feeling it. The cost of your trip keeps rising each and every day. Gas, food, hotels all get more expensive every day that you travel. And then finally, vulnerability to interest rate changes. Suddenly, the hills become steeper, making it harder to even to drive or to get over a hill because your car is so overloaded it can't climb as well as it could in the past. You see your family struggling because of this increasingly uncomfortable ride. You're getting worried. The car is struggling to get up the hill. The engine's overheating. It's clear this journey cannot continue safely like it is. The debt is making our lives far more unstable. The changes that happen, like something like AI, we're more vulnerable to that. When we go into a recession, we're more vulnerable to be affected by that recession. Like everything becomes more intense when we're carrying this debt. There's a lot more to this. I'll include some links from other YouTube creators in the show notes to help you if you want to learn more. Part 5. A bipartisan problem. Before we start pointing fingers, it's crucial to understand that this issue transcends political parties. The debt has grown under both Democratic and Republican administrations, indicating a systemic problem that requires bipartisan solutions. Picture a classic tug of war scene. On one side, we have a team decked out in red shirts. Let's call them elephants. On the other side, a team in blue, and we'll call them donkeys. They're pulling with all their might, each side convinced that they are right. But here's the twist. The rope isn't moving. Instead, it's stretching, and the fibers are starting to fray and snap. What we're seeing here isn't a contest of strength between parties. It's a demonstration of how both sides are contributing to our debt problem. Let me give you a concrete example. In 1980, at the start of Ronald Reagan's presidency, the national debt was about $908 billion. By the end of his 2 terms in 1988, it had nearly tripled to $2.6 trillion. Fast forward to 2000, when Bill Clinton left office, the debt stood at 5.67 trillion. 8 years later, after George Bush's presidency, it had grown to 10 trillion. Then came Barack Obama, his tenure, and by the time he left office in 2017, the debt had ballooned to 19.95 trillion. Most recently, under Donald Trump's administration and the first part of Joe Biden's, we've seen the debt skyrocket to over 33 trillion, partly due to the unprecedented spending in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As our political parties keep pulling the rope, our economy is reaching its breaking point. Neither side is winning. We're all losing. And this isn't about red versus blue. It's about red, white, and blue, and the future of our nation. Both parties have contributed to the problem, and it will take both parties working together to solve it. Part 6, the puzzling lack of public concern. Picture a bustling city street. People are hurrying along, focused on their daily lives. Some are glued to their phones, others chat with friends and colleagues. But right in the middle of the sidewalk is something alarming, a massive ticking time bomb. It's labeled national debt in big, bold letters. The ticking is loud, almost deafening, yet remarkably, most people are walking right past it without a second glance. This scene represents our current situation. The debt crisis is right in front of us, growing more urgent by the day, but many of us are oblivious to it. Let's break down why. I think it comes down to at least 4 things. Number 1, complexity. It's like the bomb is covered in some complex mathematical equations, and people glance at it, they get confused, and they keep on walking. We have a very short-term focus. Everyone's too busy looking at their phones, dealing with their immediate concerns. It's difficult to notice the long-term threat when you're focused on the short-term problems. Normalization. The bomb's been there for so long, it's become part of the scenery, and people are just used to seeing it. And then finally, scale. The bomb is so big, it's hard for people to comprehend. It just doesn't seem real. But look, a few people have noticed. They're pointing at the bomb, trying to get other people to pay attention. And these are economists, these are policy experts and concerned citizens who understand the gravity of our situation. We need to be like these people. We can't afford to keep walking by. This bomb, our national debt, doesn't care who's president or which party is in power. It's going to go off unless we all work together to diffuse it. So this isn't about Democrats or Republicans. It's about all of us, every American. We need to have tough conversations. We need to make difficult decisions, and we need to ensure that everyone from Main Street to Wall Street plays a part in the solution. When the bomb goes off, it affects all of us. But if we work together to diffuse it, we can create a stronger, more equitable economy for everyone. And it's time to stop, pay attention, and act before it's too late. Part 7, the path forward. I like to use these pictures so that you can see it in your mind. Picture this, a bustling town hall. It's filled to capacity with a diverse crowd, young professionals, retirees, students, blue-collar workers, business owners, and at the front of the room, 2 things command attention. A massive digital clock counting down from 20 years, and next to it, a screen showing the national debt ticking up in real time, the numbers whirling by at a dizzying pace. Every hour that passes, if we're just looking at the $1.7 trillion that we added to the debt last year, it's about $228 million every hour that we're spending beyond what we can actually pay for. That's right, 228 million added to our debt every single hour, every single day, for every single year. In the time we've been in this town hall meeting, our nation has likely added over $500 million to its debt. So when we're in this room and we're trying to figure this out, we need to accept the hard truth. Addressing this crisis isn't a choice, it's a necessity. We're looking at some tough choice decisions, higher taxes, reduced government spending, but remember, we are going to need to look at short-term pain for long-term gain. So let's break down what each of us can do before we talk about what you can do personally with your money. So as a group, what I think we need to do is, number one, we need to educate ourselves. We need to study for the most important test of our lives. We need to understand the basics of government, debt, budgets, and economic policy. We need to be able to make economics and fiscal, we need to take economic and fiscal responsibility and bring that into our everyday conversations with our family, with our friends, and with our politicians. We need to demand action. We need to flood our representatives' offices with calls, emails, letters. We need to attend town halls and ask tough questions. We need to make it clear that this is a priority. Third, we need to be willing to sacrifice. This means accepting cuts to government programs we benefit from or paying higher taxes. It's going to look like being on a financial diet. It's not going to be fun, but it's going to be necessary for our long-term health. Number four, we need to engage in serious discussions. We need to have hard conversations about our priorities as a nation. Do we spend more on defense or education? Do we spend more on healthcare or infrastructure? These are debates that we're going to have at some point or another. We also need to very, very importantly think about future generations. Every decision we make should be viewed through the lens of how will this affect our children? How will this affect our grandchildren or great grandchildren? We're not just solving for today, we're securing tomorrow. So that clock, that's our timeline, 2 decades. It might seem like a long time, but in the life of a nation, it's a blink of an eye. If we don't act, we're looking at a very serious problem that could dwarf any technical default we have ever seen before. This wouldn't just be a delayed payment. It would be a seismic event felt across the US and the entire world. As these thoughts kind of soak in, we might want to take a nice deep breath and realize that the choice is ours. Right now, we have the opportunity to be the generation that either kicked the can down the road or the generation that stood up and made the hard decisions to secure our nation's future. What's it going to be? Part 8, the wealth gap and future challenges. When we talk about the national debt, we need to understand 2 important issues. Number 1, wealth inequality, and number 2, technological change. In the case of wealth inequality, most discussions about national debt often come from the wealthiest 1% and have benefited the wealthiest 1%. And unfortunately, those folks probably don't understand the reality of what it's like for most Americans. The debt crisis is connected to the growing wealth gap. And I think it's really important that everyday, average citizens stand up and take a very strong position of the power that each of us have as voters and as people that can represent communities, because we do not want these decisions to just be made by those top 1% earners. The other thing I want you to think about is things like the technology changes that are happening. AI, for example, I have used AI a lot. I really understand the power of this tool. And I do have a lot of concerns that it is going to wipe out a lot of jobs. And right now, the infrastructure of our economy is not built to support the job creation to fill new jobs with the ones that AI wipes out. Now, that can mean a lot of changes and disruption. And if we are not making sure that the government is paying attention to how these changes affect average everyday citizens, there's a good chance that this 1% is going to continue to draw great amounts of money from the economy and not lead it back to those who need it the most, right? The middle class, the lower middle class, the folks that are very, very vulnerable to the economy already. So The questions that I think that we need to be considering are, how do we ensure that everyone, not just the wealthy, help solve the debt problem? How do we protect workers as technology changes our jobs? How can technology benefit all Americans, not just the rich? And what responsibility do the wealthiest have in addressing our economic challenges? Solving the debt crisis means addressing inequality and preparing for technological changes. These issues are all connected. Another deep breath. As we wrap up, I want to return to Thomas Jefferson's wise words: never spend your money before you've earned it. It's time for our nation to start living by this principle. Let's also remember that every challenge presents an opportunity. Yes, our debt situation is serious, but I do believe we have the ingenuity, the resources, and the resilience to address it. Throughout history, Americans have faced seemingly insurmountable obstacles and emerged stronger. This is our moment to do that again. By tackling on the issues head on, we have a chance to reimagine our economic system so that it's more equitable and sustainable, invest in innovations that benefit all Americans, and create an economic boom like what happened after World War II, where we also faced a debt crisis, but we earned our way out of it. I think it's important that we continue to strengthen our global economic leadership or community. This isn't just going to affect Americans, this is going to affect people around the world. Before I sign off, I know the question probably on your mind is, what can be done with your money? How can you protect yourself? And I want to say there's no perfect solution. There are different things you can do. If you want to protect yourself with rising inflation, you have inflation protected investments like real estate, I bonds, tips, inflation adjusted annuities. These are short-term strategies, right, to protect against currency fluctuations. You can diversify across assets and currencies, international stocks and bonds, foreign currencies with stable balance sheets, countries like the Swiss franc, precious metals, gold, silver, platinum, cryptocurrencies, although those are very volatile. You can protect against a lack of supply with tangible assets and skills, physical assets, real estate, food and supplies, that would be the preppers, personal skills and education enhancement. And then there are always the traditional financial instruments like stocks, particularly in companies with strong balance sheets and pricing power, short-term government securities, dividend-paying stocks. But let's face it, I don't know if there's anywhere to hide from what we're talking about. I think that's why I wanted to create this video now, is that we have the ability to influence the representatives to make them know that this isn't something that we're accepting, that we're not just going to roll over and keep ignoring it. It is a serious problem. Yes, the road ahead will not be easy. We do have the power to change course, though. It requires awareness, action, willingness to make tough choices. It also requires hope, collaboration, and a shared vision for a better America. So let's roll up our sleeves, engage in these crucial conversations, and work together to create a stable and more prosperous financial future for all Americans. These challenges are great, but our potential to overcome them is even greater. I also want to say that I'm disheartened by the divisiveness in America. Ideologies on all sides are flawed, and our failure to love and support each other, regardless of wealth, race, origin, is troubling. Hatred only breeds more hatred. It doesn't solve anything. These issues matter deeply to me, and while we may agree or disagree on our worldviews, our leadership, economics, our growing divide is pushing us towards a dangerous future. No amount of wealth can protect us if we cannot find common ground. Collaboration is key to solving our national debt, our social divisions, and the global challenges. And as we face this crisis, I hope that we can prioritize shared humanity over our differences. We must approach these issues with compassion, understanding, and cooperation. I really do think our future depends not just on financial solutions, but on healing our divisions, working together for the common good. I know I'm a dreamer. I admit it. It's a challenge, but I do believe we have the ability to overcome it. Thank you so much for listening. Let's do our part to create a more unified, united, compassionate, and financially responsible world. Be sure if you have any questions about anything I shared, you put them in the comments. The community is incredibly well resourced. I don't have all the answers, but I know by working together, we can help each other learn, grow, and face the future. Thank you.